Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. This is Dr. Halimah again with you, and today's lecture is lecture number 7, and the title of our lecture is Translation and Culture. Now, in this lecture, I would go through the following points, which is very important. First, of course, we need to know the learning outcomes of the lecture, and we will go through definitions, then the cultural categories, and the general consideration of these categories, and then we will go through the ecology, these points, which are very important if you want to understand culture and translation. Ecology, material culture, social organization, historical terms, international terms, religious terms, artistic terms. And then I will suggest how to deal, and when we are dealing with this, the culture and translation, what you need to do. Now, in this lecture, by the end of this lecture, you should be able to show what? The relationship between culture and translation, and to be able to solve some cultural problems in translation. This is really the learning outcome of this lecture. Very briefly, I'd like to define what is culture. Culture is a way of life, is the way of life of who? And it's the way of life and its manifestation that peculiar to a community that uses a particular language as its means of expression. It's a way of life of a community which who has certain language. Now, when we have a cultural focus in the text, then you are bound to have a translation problem. And this translation problem, example for instance, why do we have such translation problems? Oh, because the culture gap between the target, the cultural gap between the target and the source language is there. There is a gap. Now, like for instance, if you look at cricket words, you know, cricket probably, I don't know whether it exists here in Saudi Arabia or not, but cricket, even in England or anywhere in the world, if you don't understand the cricket words, you cannot translate them. You cannot. So there is a problem with cricket words when it comes to translation, like camel words and etc. But words like which have universal meaning, like table, mirror, breakfast, you shouldn't have a problem with them translating them from this culture to another culture, because they exist. They are universal. Whether they are in English, there is a mirror, or Arabic, there is a mirror, or in Chinese, there is a mirror, and so on. These are very few definitions. Now, what are the cultural categories? When we think cultural, you have to think of ecology, material culture, social culture, organization, and then gestures and habits. You know, so we have 5 categories, but we will take each category separately. I will explain to you later what we mean by flora, fauna, winds, plains, and so on. But these are examples of the ecology. These are examples of the material culture and the social culture, work and leisure, and so on. Now, let's take, but before we take up each item on its own, I would like you to understand that when you are face to face with a cultural problem, or with a cultural focused text, you need really to recognize all cultural achievements referred to in the source language text. It means you need to have respect for all foreign languages and for all foreign cultures. This is very important, and you should be aware of the translation procedures you need to use, like transference and componential analysis. Transferences usually are used in literary text, which gives a local flavor, you know, local color and atmosphere. Whereas componential analysis it excludes the culture and highlights the message. It means it tackles the message more than the cultural aspect of the text. So when you are doing any text which has cultural focus, you need to be aware of these approaches. Now, when we talk about ecology in translation, now ecology, what does ecology mean? Or it covers the following. Flora, it means نباتات منطقة معينة. All sorts of plants. Fauna, حيوانات منطقة معينة. All sorts of animals. This is what we mean by ecology. Ecology covers flora, fauna, winds, plains, hills, blah, blah, blah. Now, regarding the flora and fauna, they are more local. They are very specific, very cultural. And they are not translated unless they appear in the source language and target language environment. So there is a translation problem here when you come up with for instance, flora or the fauna of a certain culture. Like terms in Arabic, al-habba al-sawda, al-naqa wal-ba'ir. Now, al-habba al-sawda don't exist in the English culture. How would you translate it? I leave it to you. But you need to think about this. Al-naqa wal-ba'ir. You know, there is a difference between al-naqa and al-ba'ir. Don't tell me camel, camel. No. I will leave it to you, and when we will be talking about the linguistic problems and the cultural problems in Arabic English translation, we will refer to it, inshallah. Okay? So don't worry about this. But this is very briefly about what ecology means and covers. The material culture covers what? Covers food, clothes, houses, towns, and transport. Now, food is very important to people and very sensitive, and it is an expression of national culture. Now, food sometimes causes translational problems. Now, how would you translate kabsa? How would you translate farid? How would you translate shanklish? Now, because these types of food, they mean a lot to us. They express our national culture, and we are proud of them. How would you be able to translate these these terms into English? You need to think about that. So this is an example of material cultural problem, or food in particular. Now, clothes, again, clothes cause problem translation. But if you want to translate them, you need to use the generic term either before or after the term. Like, for instance, if you want to translate جلابية أو ثوب الرجل. Now, جلابية أو ثوب الرجل, I know people in the West have noticed that Arabs use ثوب or جلابية, or for women عباية. Now, how to translate this? I have given you an example. National dress for Arab men. I mean, I know it's long, but at least you explain to people what we mean. This is our national dress. This is our national dress, and we are proud of it. So you need to take into account when you are translating cultural materials like food, clothes, houses, and so on and so forth. Now, social culture, what do we mean by social culture? Social culture, in any terms, related to work and leisure. But most of the jobs we have or we do don't really cause any problem, you know. I mean, such as, for instance, a chocolate shop. If you want to translate a chocolate shop from English into Arabic, okay. But imagine you want to translate pork butcher. A pork butcher doesn't exist in Saudi Arabia, alhamdulillah. But even if you want to translate, if you put it in any other country, it's not an easy term, but people might find an equivalent to it. But I doubt it in the Arabic world would find any acceptance or any appeal to people. You won't be able to say لحام الخنازير. You can't say that. See? So this is a little example. So, you know, you have to, you have cultural words like snooker, hockey, squash, all these are new terms you need to think about when you are translating. Now, regarding social organizations, again, this has something to do with culture, and whether they are political or administrative, you know, you need to be aware of all the organizations and customs, activities, procedures, and concepts that are related to social organizations. We have political and administrative, religious and artistic. Now, examples are like the title of a head of a state, king, president, prime minister. They are translatable, you know. Names of ministries are usually translated as, if you want, if for instance in England or in English or in Britain we use treasury. Now how do we translate it here? Here you cannot translate treasury, but only in finance ministry, whether it is in Arabic or in English. Whether it's in Arabic or in English, it's finance ministry. You don't translate Al-Kanz, treasury, Al-Kanz, no. Wazarat al-Kanz, you can't do that. So you need to give equivalent to it, finance ministry, home office. Home office is really specific to Britain, home office, but here in the UK, in the kingdom or in the Arab world, we say Ministry of the Interior, which is fine, equivalent. Now, historical terms, you know, they not easy to translate, but only when they are accepted in the other language. Normally, the transferred word can be replaced by the functional or descriptive terms, as in the example above regarding the item before. Now, the historical terms, if you want to translate siècle de lumière, it's a French, the age of the Enlightenment. Asr Tanwir, this is how we translate it, Asr Tanwir. Now you need to, Asr Tanwir, the age, siècle de lumière, you need to think very carefully about translating historical terms. Most of them really are not translatable, so you need to transfer them rather than translate them. International terms, again, international terms, most of the international terms have their own equivalents because they have established translations. People have agreed on them, like Organisation Mondiale de la Santé, المنظمة العالمية للصحة. In English, if you want to translate المنظمة العالمية للصحة, International Organization for Health. So people know these terms. So don't worry about the international terms so much, because they exist, or they have existed for some time now, because they agree on the format. Now, religious terms is a very sensitive area. You need to be really an expert and a very experienced translator to be able to translate religious terms. They tend to be transferred. If you need to really translate them, transferred rather than translate them. Now, the commonest words in Arabic are translated naturalized, as in the word Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, azza wa jal, Allah. If you look it up in the dictionary, it is there. It is naturalized. It becomes an English word now because of the spread of Islam, alhamdulillah. So this is very important. Religious terms, not easy to translate, so you better watch out and be careful. You need to transfer them, you need to explain them, you need to give them some kind of interpretation, but there are certain words which has have been naturalized. It means they have become anglicized. They are found in the dictionary. Now the artistic terms means terms that related to art, like museum, theaters, opera houses, and so on and so forth. Now you can transfer them. Some of them are transferable and some of them are translated. So you need to be careful about artistic terms as well. Now the last item, which is very important, I'd like to explain to you. When you are dealing with culture in translation, you need to be aware of the following. Now, because you are either good at translating or you are not. And what makes a good translator different from a bad translator is really how much he can tackle the cultural problems in translation. Now, when you are dealing with cultural focus or cultural bias in a text, you need really to look at two things: the contextual factors and the translation procedures. The contextual factors of the text, you need to understand the purpose of the text, the motivation and cultural and technical and linguistic level of the readership. In other words, you need to take into account the motivation of the reader of your translated text, in the cultural background of the reader who is going to read your translation. In addition to that, you need to be aware of the importance of the referent in the source text, source language text. And you need to understand, is this word recent or is it old or obsolete? Now, these contextual factors are very, very important to take into account when you are dealing with culture and translation. The second factor, the second point, are translation procedure. You need to make up your mind. What kind of procedure I'm going to use with this particular text, culturally focused or culturally emphasized? Now, shall I use transference? Shall I use cultural equivalence? Shall I use naturalization? Or shall I use literal translation? Or labeling method? Or componential analysis method? Or there is an accepted standard of translation? Or shall I use paraphrasing? So really, these are the most important procedures you can use when you are translating a text which has cultural bias or cultural focus. So, when you are translating, what are the contextual factors of this text? Okay, you identify them, as I mentioned earlier. Then you say, all right, what kind of procedure shall I use? Shall I use one particular procedure, or I can use a couple, or I can use a combination of 1, 2, 3, 4, or is it a mixture? Of course. All these procedures interfere with one another. You can use probably 10% of transference, or 20% of cultural equivalence, or 10% of naturalization. It depends on the message itself, on the text itself. So you need to work within this framework. And as I said earlier in my previous lectures, all this comes through processing. All these cognitive activities helps you to decide what kind of what kind of context it is, what kind of translation procedure you prefer, you would like to use. Okay, so I hope this is clear. This is very brief. You need to refer to the main text, and hopefully you will find it useful and clear to you in this lecture. And I wish you all the best as usual. Thank you very much indeed, and see you again in the other lectures.